and any of these other Kentucky musicians that I would name would act that generous and be that welcoming to any other band without question. There's a sense of like almost like Southern hospitality that we have, but also just like a, in Don's words, in a situation where that was not happening, Don said, "It's just not right for the community," in his accent that I cannot mimic.
Midnight Ramble was created to explore the human side of the music industry from an Appalachian perspective. In this episode, I met with Ella Webster on the east side of Lexington one Monday afternoon to discuss her East Kentucky roots, old-time fiddle music, and her experience playing fiddle for Cole Chaney, now on tour.
Well, I first want to talk about your musical family. I've heard you talk about your grandfather on stage and you sang a song of his. And so I'm curious, what influences your family had on you playing music professionally?
Yes, so my grandpa has had his law practice in Pike County, in downtown Pikeville, since he was, I think he graduated from law school at UK, and then him and my grandma moved their family to Pike County, maybe in the early 70s, late 60s, and he's had that there in downtown. It's near Main Street ever since. Like, he still practices law. I think he is 77 years old.
That's great.
And the inside of his law practice is unlike any office that you will ever go to. So the walls are like all, the original wood of either the building or like he stripped it off of barns and stuff. He's got a full like old school pool table mural of dogs playing pool in one room. And it's also like a history museum of, the banjo and his life and Hillbilly Days, which he helps coordinate, and our family. So like you go in there to, try to get a divorce or get your taxes fixed or something, but you're
getting educated.
You're getting educated. He makes you stand up and, look at the old banjos that he has, or he brags about his grandchildren, which, is very nice. Or he's just got stuff it's very, very interesting because he's kind of infamous. He had a Sunday column, an opinion column in the Herald Leader for years. And it was, a little bit satirical, a little bit political, and he had some like, folk mountain characters that he would talk about and the world through their eyes that a lot of people followed. And him and my grandma also started the newspaper in Pikeville, the Appalachian News Express.
I was reading an article this morning about how both your grandparents played music. The article was actually about you wearing one of your grandmother's dresses that she used to wear when she was performing.
Yeah, that is, other than playing music, one of my biggest kind of hobbies and passions is, I guess, her clothes, of the ones that I can fit in. She's a very petite woman, but Cheryl Webster, my grandmother, has saved like every piece of clothing that she has ever owned, including something from her high school home ec class or like a college home ec class, because they were also both first generation college students. He went to Transy and she went to UK. And it's a shirt that I wear like all the time. And I guess it's just held up all these years. But a couple of years ago when I was at UK, I knew someone who worked at the magazine KRNL or Colonel, and they did a project on like heritage fashion pieces. So that's why they did that article to like showcase this gunny sax dress, which I love because it's like vintage gold that my grandma used to like wear while they were performing and stuff. So she sings harmony to his like lead singing, and he's the songwriter and plays banjo, and they've had a band called the Mule Band out of Pikeville in or since the 70s probably. Yeah, and it's still alive and running. John is a member. He is a rhythm guitar player.
Oh, I love that.
I do sit in occasionally as a fiddle player, although their fiddle player, Eddie, has been with them for forever. So yeah, they've got a band. They downsized and she gave me so many of her clothes. I live in a college apartment. Luckily, it has a big closet, but yeah, I have a lot of vintage clothing.
That's amazing. She kept that,
Mhm.
and the stuff was so well made. You're
Mhm.
still wearing it.
Oh yeah,
I love that.
Oh yeah, she had a really big closet in her house when I was growing up that was like, it kind of felt like one of those Narnia closets that went on forever. Like the more that you would go through racks of clothing, the more that the closet would span on. And when I was in high school and vintage clothing was sort of kind of gaining recognition, or I was realizing how cool it was, I started going up to Pikeville, or they lived in Cave Run at the time, which is right before you get there, and kind of sneaking around and like opening up these giant drawers and looking through it and finding her clothing, my dad's clothing from high school, too much that I even knew what to do with. So I've sold some of it too, but kept like a lot of the pieces.
That's really cool. So do your parents play music and sing?
No, not at all, which is, we always talk about how it's funny because my grandparents on my dad's side are musical. They have a band. Their son is musical. He sings and played trumpet, but my dad was a football player, played for UK. That totally skipped him. And my mom is, lovingly a little bit tone deaf. Like she will say that to you. They both appreciate music so much though. And she had a bunch of aunts, or still does, who are harmony singers together. When I was 4, my dad's mom, who's a singer, and my mom, I think, took me to a Celtic folk music performance, and there were dancers, and I think I'm remembering this. There were dancers, and my fiddle teachers to be Daniel and Amy Carwile were playing at the performance. And so then I think maybe in the next following weeks, my mom or grandma, one of them, pulled me aside and was like, so did you like what you saw at that concert? I think we're going to and they were wanting me to say yes. And I probably did. And they were like, okay, well, that woman is going to teach you how to play violin. So they kind of gave me an option. But my grandpa started giving me musical instruments for like my birthday and Christmas and stuff when I was 1. So,
wow.
So it wasn't necessarily forced on me, but it was just always so present in my life. And then one day around the age of 4, it was like the spring when I was 4, they put me in lessons with Amy Carwile. So that's when it started, and I pretty much I've never stopped since.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You have such a beautiful voice. I remember the first time I saw you, it was past summer at a jam at West 6 Brewing, and there were a couple fiddle players, but you were singing and you were leading a song, and I turned and I was like, what's her name? Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Yeah. See, that was one of the examples where like I was in front of some new people that I hadn't fully just like led a song before. And even going into that experience, I had the thoughts of like, okay, I'm just going to do it and like sing a song in jams, because I do privately. Like that's the other thing. I've been jamming with my friends and like really close musicians to me since I was in like mid high school regularly. And in front of those people, I have been singing for a lot longer. But yeah, in public, it would be like a once a year occasion, and I would get so scared. But yeah, the person who forced me to not do that anymore was Cole Cheney, who I play with, because he essentially, in a very, honestly, a good business move for him and a very just straightforward way, he was like, okay, you can sing, you can harmonize. I would like for you to sing and harmonize with me in our band.
That's awesome.
It made perfect sense. So I just did it, it was pretty daunting, but I was up to the task and I went for it. And so far it has gone pretty well.
How did you meet Cole?
I met Cole. Did the floods in Whitesburg happen in 2022?
think so. Yeah.
I met him that summer, maybe once very early on. I like to tell the story that, I noticed that he was playing a lot with the members of Wolfpen Branch, who are or the former members of Wolfpen Branch, and just some of the best bluegrass musicians around here. And I look up to them so much. But none of them are 23, which is how old Cole is, and I'm 22. And I went up to him at a show one time, and Charlie wasn't there, but he was already friends with him. And I was like, if you ever want to play music with people your own age, my door is always open. But we really didn't actually connect or play music until the Burl benefit show for the flooding. So that was in August of 2022. And yeah, him and me and Charlie and Blakely Berger had the most, I seriously enjoyed it. And I can still remember some of the songs that we played. We had a super fun jam in the green room, just between people playing outside on the big stage. And as it got closer and closer for Cole to be the headliner, and I had not ever seen him perform before, we were just back there playing music and playing fiddle tunes, and he could pick those out on guitar, and so can Charlie. And then he got up and played with, Wolfpen, and I was like, wow, this is huge. And everyone was singing along and stuff. I have that memory distinctly in my mind. But then I think a few months later is when he asked me if I could play with him at the Caverns for the upcoming New Year's Eve.
Oh.
And at first I was like, what? I just, honestly, I was 21 and I was still in college. I was in my last semester, and it was obviously, or definitely, the biggest, artist that had ever asked me to play with them, other than doing some guest stuff with the local honeys and stuff like that. And kind of a different world, and him playing with so many great bluegrass musicians like Jeff Guernsey, who played fiddle before him, and Michael Cleveland, who is a literal bluegrass prodigy, playing on his record. It gave me complete imposter syndrome. For months, I was like, oh, I cannot believe he asked me this. But then we played the gig, and he asked me if I could play some more gigs with him, and kind of made clear his intention that, he wanted to form his own full band, and not as much the full Wolfpen bluegrass thing, which was just kind of a more electrified direction that he was going in, and also a scheduling thing with some of that band, I'm sure. But yeah, he just decided that I was going to be his fiddle player, and I was like, okay, I think this is going to be something that I'm in for the long haul, and I'm so happy to be here, and that's how that all came to be.
Well, I do want to say you are a huge part of the foundation of the music scene in Lexington, especially for young musicians. For instance, Charlie Overman spoke about you and how you are one of the best songwriters that he knows, and he looks up to you and likes to run his songwriting by you. And then I heard Jay Skaggs say on Red Barn Radio that when he came to Lexington, that he asked who he could play music with, and someone said, go find Ella Webster. So I just want to thank you for your work and your organization, because it's a pleasure to hear the music that you and the wonderful crowd that play with you. It's really wonderful to hear that music.
Thank you.
That's cool to see.
Well, I was brought up with I was so lucky to have experiences that taught me what it truly feels like to have community in music. And now that wasn't in all of the types of music that I played. I played in classical music, and it wasn't as much like that. But in old time music, and specifically the Kentucky old time scene, it was always a bunch of musicians playing together at all different levels, at all different age levels, and just the most fun collaborative thing. And there were also always a bunch of women around playing music. So I came back to, from Eastern Kentucky, from those sorts of experiences, probably as a high schooler, and I was like, why does no one sit around and play songs together? I go to so many rock concerts, and like, no offense, but like it's all men, and the only women that are there to be like spectators.
Mm-hmm.
And this feels totally uninvolved with like what I do. And I slowly started building a web of people who I got to just jam,
Mm-hmm.
sit around and
Mm-hmm.
play music. And that is Charlie, and that is one of my good friends, Grant Curlis, who was one of those people in the rock bands, but he's also an amazing country musician, and Olivia Pepiot and Virginia Pepiot. And my boyfriend John is like great about that sort of thing, and our friend Taylor, who passed away. But yeah, just slowly building that web of like associating it with a social activity rather than performance. I love performance, but in the words of like one of my old time mentors who lives near Frankfurt, John Herod, who's like a big fiddle master in Kentucky, it's like, I would much rather, performing is great, but I would much rather, in his words, be in an onion of people just surrounding each other, playing music all together, sitting in chairs. It is like the most fun experience ever. So I just tried to recreate those types of experiences with the young people who I knew in Lexington. And I do feel like it has like, yeah, we've had a lot of people jamming at my little apartment on UK's campus before. So it's super awesome. Yeah.
I love that. Don Rogers, I was talking to him just about all the young people playing, and he was like, that 20 years ago, you couldn't find anyone to play with. So it's really, it really is a beautiful thing that you all are doing. And it makes me think, when you think about the purpose of music and music before it was commercialized, that is exactly, it's a lifestyle.
It was like
it's
a
part
porch
of your
hobby. Yeah. Especially with old time music too. I mean, bluegrass brought traditional mountain music out of like off of people's porches and onto stages that were bigger and more amplified, and into competitions where notes were more complicated and types of melodies were more complicated. But some of the old time music that you play, these super simplified fiddle tunes, are just about sort of like meditating on the same sort of musical line or melody just over and over and over again. And that's like where the fun lies in it, just sitting around with people. And I hear that term porch music said a lot by the banjo player John Haywood, who lives in Whitesburg and has a tattoo parlor. He gave me my first 2 tattoos. Oh, really?
Right. It was like the month he opened.
I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, they would be from John Haywood probably. But yeah, like he is always talking about the banjo, or George Gibson, one of his mentors, and they're always just like, this is porch music. It was a social activity. Like for people like famous old time banjo players, you don't hear about a ton of them going out and being performers, or when you do, like Roscoe Holcomb in the big city, it's like rare stuff because people had to go into where they lived and like literally and figuratively extract them from where they lived and put them in the city, and sometimes they paid them, but they just did it as it was their choice to do it because they were already in some sort of industry already. So that's very fascinating. Yeah.
Is it through John or maybe your grandfather how you got connected with the Cowan Creek Mountain Music School?
Yes.
Can you talk about your connection with that?
A new schedule just came out today, I think, actually. So you can go online as of the beginning of February and see who all the staff are going to be for this summer school. But when I was when I was 7 years old, my grandma in Pikeville started taking my sister and I for a week in the summer to a random motel in a random place that we had never been before. And I was this little Lexingtonian girl, and my mom packed our matching outfits and like wrapped them in bows. And I was a little bit apprehensive of it at first, as a 7-year-old might be. But that's where I met the Rogers family and Dawn's daughter, Grace, who is one of the best songwriters and musicians that I know. And Carla Gover's family, and just, a bunch of these people in this community that I've talked about. But yes, so I started going to Cowan when I was 7 and took an intermediate fiddle class with Anna Roberts DeVault, part of the duo Anna and Elizabeth, who had a huge impact on like my inspiration of old time music and women playing music. And then I have gone there ever since. I have only missed 1 year because of COVID and 1 year because I was doing like a study abroad thing in France. So eventually they give young students like some of them an opportunity. They'll give you like a scholarship or an award. So there was a late fiddle player named Paul David Smith, who is a Pike County fiddle player. And they gave me the Paul David Smith Award, which invites the students to come back and be teaching assistants. So at this point in my life, I am most years I'm going back as a teaching assistant to some of the master fiddle and banjo players or whoever who's teaching a class. I'm not sure where I'm going to be this year, but I'm definitely going to be at Cowan Creek for the week that it exists. Like, it is so awesome. Yeah. All of like the positives of music that I've talked about up to this point, like the positive imprint on my mind of like where I close my eyes and envision like my musical happy place is at that camp. As far as like all skill types, you'll be in a jam at nighttime, maybe after classes at the motel where we all stay, in a jam with like, you know, Jesse Wells from the food stamps to, you know, someone who picked up a banjo 3 days ago, and they're all jamming with each other. And there's also probably going to be children there, like way up past their bedtimes. It's all ages, all skill levels. And I think that people like Don say that out of all of the camps that he's participated in, like it's one of the only ones where that sort of community does like cross over so much, because a lot of things in the music world are like stratified by, you know, who a group thinks like they're good enough to match with or whatever. You know, it's how all social life kind of tends to work sometimes, but it's utopian at Cowan Creek. Like everyone is just there to enjoy old time music, and old time music it's fairly easy to play. Like you would learn Cluck Old Hen on banjo within 3 days. Like you would do amazingly there, and it's just so fun. It's in Whitesburg. It's on Big Cowan, which is like I think kind of like a holler in Whitesburg or in not Lewis County, in Letcher County. And there are classes in the mornings, and then you drive over to the community center where you have lunch provided, and then there are guest performances, workshops, and you jam with your skill level of class, and then there's like some free time, and then in the evenings there are concerts or there are square dances. And it is like the most fun thing I do every single year. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to hear about your experiences in East Kentucky. I think it shows more sides to that region to shine light on the beauty of the community there. Cool to hear about.
It's awesome. I mean, I think that a lot of people do come in from outside of the region. I mean, including myself, I'm born and raised in Lexington, Kentucky. So when I do these things, I'm doing it as, you know, a degree of an outsider, although, you know, some have pointed out, you know, that my connection with my grandparents and growing up with like these musicians and stuff has, you know, I have some level of connection with the place. But there are also, the administration of the camp does a really good job of ensuring that the place itself is still honored, and that maybe, you know, the idea of the camp doesn't stray too far away from like recognizing that they are letting us have a, you know, hundreds of people music camp in their holler, and we're still learning fiddle or banjo tunes from people from Letcher County and surrounding counties. And there are still staff members who are from there, so that it does ultimately sort of cycle back into the community. So that is like a really good part of something that they make sure to do at Cowan Creek. Like people like Brett Ratliff and Kevin Howard, Carla Gover is the current director, but they have all been very local directors, and also like are amazing musicians. So that's been really cool. Yeah. And John Haywood is always there, and he's, you know, just, he is not, you know, at the level of he's, you know, at an infinite level. He is an amazing banjo player, but, you know, I grew up around all of these very old men who just kind of sat back under the trees after the concerts were over and they just picked out old time tunes, and they were just so chill and they were so fun to be around. And he has that same sort of zen as like these ethereal, like older old time musicians, like even at a younger age, like, you know, he already represents that sort of group, which is great because, you know, I'm sure that Dawn maybe mentioned this to you before, but like as these older people are dying, you know, the generations are shifting up a little bit. And I would say that there is still like a generation of older masters, but there are very few old time musicians in Eastern Kentucky who like learned their tunes straight from the source, just because of, you know, time and stuff. One of my mentors in old time music was named Jimmy McCown, or Jimmy McCown, and he was from Pike County, and he was very good friends with my grandparents. They always would go to bluegrass festivals at the same time in like the 70s and 80s, and he camped next to them. And then when I was younger, he would always camp next to us at old time festivals. And he had a band called the Outdoor Plumbing Company, and learned from a fiddle player who was also from Pike County named Snake Chapman. And so a lot of the more like the older, more original, straight from the mountains sounding fiddle tunes that I play are ones that I got from Jimmy, who got them from Paul David Smith, who got them from playing with Snake Chapman. And all these men are from the place where my grandparents live. So Pike County fiddle tunes are like one of my favorite things to play. Yeah. It's very linear. It's very like generational, and it is very rewarding to like keep it all, you know, alive and stuff. Yeah. I could talk about it for forever. You know, I love all this gigging that I'm doing, but I kind of talking about this all reminds me like, you know, I don't participate in old time as much when I am gigging, but it is an extremely nerdy part of my life that I could, you know, go on about for forever. But it's not what I do a ton. But during that one last full week in June every year, I plan on doing it for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah. Just having that experience too. I know, I mean, when you talk about music, old time music or folk music, forever, people have always talked about authenticity. So you even understanding where the music has come from and giving recognition to who it's come from.
Oh, yes.
I think that's something that weighs heavy. I mean, I'm not a musician, but it really weighs heavy on me ethically for people not to say, this is what influenced me, if it could be something so small.
Yeah.
That it's, you know, no one's in a vacuum. Everyone's influenced by someone, something.
You're absolutely right.
Say it.
Yeah, no one is in a vacuum. And, you know, I've gone down periods of like almost like rabbit holes in my life where I've become overly obsessed with, you know, the concept of authenticity and ownership of music. I think that gets talked about a lot in old time circles, because tunes get played as if they were in a vacuum. And while it's not completely necessary to always contextualize what you're playing, you know, in a performance, you don't always have to do what Montana and Linda are so good about doing with the local honeys, which is to be like, this is where this tune came from. But there are people who have gotten popular off of playing tunes that I guess it could be argued that like they didn't give credit where credit is due. And luckily I can't think of any examples, but I think people are in this day and age very aware of like contextualizing that stuff, or at least I really appreciate when they are with like old time music.
Yeah.
Because there are so many examples of like extraction of music before cell phones or television, when, you know, musicians in the mountains who were playing porch music didn't know how influential their tunes were going to be, which is amazing, but it's also kind of sad because they didn't, you know, experience any money from that,
right? Which
is interesting.
Yeah.
And
I think actually that's one of the things that makes me pretty proud to be Appalachian, to have roots in East Kentucky, is it's very complimentary for other musicians to want to borrow from Appalachia music, clothes, accents, you know, everything from sustenance farming. backyard gardening, backyard chickens, making things from scratch, growing your own food, community music is a huge part of, Central Appalachia and also other rural places around the world. But it's definitely complementary that people, it's very cyclical, but that Appalachian music is right now being so accepted and appreciated and celebrated. You're just trying to be. Yes. That's our lifestyle. That's what our grandparents' lifestyle was.
I mean, I'm from Lexington, so like I don't have that exact same experience, but my parents grew up in the 80s and then left their homes of like Flatwoods and Pikeville, and my dad lived in Lexington. And my mom went as far as California and did acting where she intentionally lost her accent. And, they didn't experience like any insane, like hard oppression from being Appalachian, but also like it wasn't a super cool thing to say about yourself, or, a lot of people got stereotyped and stuff as like hicks or, dumb. Like my dad is a very, very intelligent man. He's an attorney now and just he's very quick and witty and smart. And he had a class at UK where the TA, like, I think either accused him of like cheating or just was like completely surprised because of the way he talked. But it's like, this man in this accent can talk on any subject for X amount of time. But they think that it is so cool that people want to pretend or like extract or imitate where they're from. I have come home, frustrated about stuff. And it's not even really my thing to be frustrated about to an extent, but like I'll complain to them like, oh, so-and-so is putting on an accent, so-and-so is from Lexington. I don't know why they're dressed like this or speaking like this. And my parents are like, we don't care. We think that that's cool. They'll just point blank, they'll like, when we were your age, it was embarrassing to be like that. I just can't believe that someone is pretending to be like they're from Eastern Kentucky. Like what? And they've said the exact same stuff.
I wish that I didn't lose my accent. A huge part was moving out west, but even my family, says like jokes and is like, oh, like who do you think you are? And I'm like, I wish I kept my, I wish my accent was thicker. It's just the way things, like I haven't intentionally tried to get rid of it. But when I was doing graduate school, I did take one or two classes in teaching English as a second language, and the professor was a native Spanish speaker, but she asked me what other languages I spoke, and she was like, "There's something about your writing that's not native English." And it didn't occur to me till years later. I was like, that's Appalachian English. That is how I was writing. And she picked up on it being different. But I always thought that was really fascinating because I was like, what do you mean speak another language? And then I was like, oh, yeah.
Well, I've heard that Appalachian English is currently the most, it resembles most closely to Old English by, saying things like yonder and some other stuff that I can't think of. But that was super interesting to learn. But in academic circles, I'm sure that it might have been kind of weird to be like from Appalachia and trying to represent that experience. And, some people are just biased and super, super elitist. I know a lot of people that have left Kentucky to go to college in New York, like in the city. And even the ones from Lexington that I know, all of them have the same experience. And even some of my friends that have gone down south to more elite universities like Columbia, that, you tell someone that you're from Kentucky, and even if you're in Atlanta, Georgia already, or you're in, New York City, which is so close to like still even Appalachia and Pennsylvania, but everyone is like, then why are you talking properly? Like why are you here? Basically is what they're trying to say. And for almost all of those friends that I have that went to school in New York, it gave them homesickness like nothing else.
Oh, that, yeah.
Like just being in an academic space where being Kentucky was like this thing that you had to like justify or advocate for.
Oh, yeah.
And because to us, like, especially in this sort of like Kentucky cultural renaissance, it's awesome to be from Kentucky. Like there are so many amazing artists and musicians and just like across the board here, activists. And to have to explain that over and over again to people is, I'm sure, like very frustrating. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never connected my experience to that justification, but it wasn't until I was in Tucson that I realized my love for mountain music, for bluegrass. One of my archaeology professors was he had a string band, and I adored him, and I really full blown took on my granny. She's a huge influence, but I was like growing tomatoes in the desert. I was all the things she does, making food from scratch, like going wherever there was music that even resembled anything from back home. I was searching that out, but I didn't connect that. But I'm sure it was similar to the like, who am I?
Yeah, especially in the time of your life, you know, in your 20s or something, when you're trying to solidify your identity, when you've got forces that are like pushing against you being from Kentucky, you're either going to say, okay, and go with them and kind of say goodbye to Kentucky, which some people choose to do. And some people have had rough lives here and they'd like something else, or you're going to double down. And, you know, I feel the same way, you know, as a Kentuckian. I love Kentucky. Yeah, definitely. So I'm touring with Cole starting next week. Cole and our band, which includes Dawn Rogers and my friend James Gooding and Jed Clark who's from Arkansas. But we'll go on this tour and tours to come. And Cole's got that song called Back to Kentucky. And honestly, in some places we don't even play it because it's like, okay, this isn't gonna resonate with people. But in a lot of places, in most places, we do play it. And the response from the random Kentuckians or people from surrounding states in the audience, like it resonates with people so much. And the song itself, I think, is a brilliant song, and it's one of my favorites to play with him, about leaving and wanting to come back and like, you know, being somewhere that feels like cold and unwelcoming. And yeah, it's been really cool for me to witness, and my mom talks about it too, like being out in the audience when we do that song, and like just people around, just like the emotional response that they have to it.
When you all played rewarding. At the Burl outside most recently, you felt it, the energy.
I know.
Yeah, that was a cool experience.
Love the energy. It was also really cold.
It was freezing. Yeah.
It was so cold. But yeah, that was so fun. When I'm teaching in elementary school classes, I'll occasionally be like, okay, kids, try to guess my other job. And when they figure out that I'm a professional musician or fiddle player, they're like, are you on YouTube? Can we look you up?
Check it out.
Can we see? And when I'm like, oh, yes, I actually am. And I start typing stuff in, they're like, oh my God, she's famous. And I'm like, no, I'm not famous. It's like a regional thing. You know, I'm just in this band. But I'd like to pull up that video of us doing Back to Kentucky at the Burl because, you know, before we can get into the words, since in elementary school, the song's fine, but I just like for them to see us playing My Old Kentucky Home on stage at the Burl, and then it like pans to this crowd of people who are being like, yes, and like screaming along to and singing the words. That is like such a good feeling, because the kids have such a cool reaction to it. They're like, first of all, they're like, oh my God, our teacher, you know, is on the stage. But then they're like, oh, I know that song. Yeah.
That's great that you do that, even connecting the next generation, that music is in your community. And you could also be a musician.
Oh, yes.
That it's not out on the radio or wherever.
I definitely have an agenda. And like I go, you know, there's so much controversy about like education and agendas or whatever. And I will say, you know, as a substitute teacher, I must admit, I actually do have an agenda. And it's to go into a classroom and, you know, occasionally show that video and be like, okay, raise your hand if you're in band or orchestra and say, you know, if you keep doing this, like, you could be like doing the exact same thing as me up on a stage for your job. Like, this is possible, although, not totally financially, possible for some people, including myself. You can't do it full time most of the time, but
Yes.
I just try to like tell kids that, and it's really cute to see the ones that like play violin and actually respond like a ton to that. It's super cool. Yeah.
So you're going on tour with Cole. Where are you all touring?
We are, I don't know the order of the dates of the places or whatever, but we are going to Ohio and then Indiana and then Pittsburgh, New York City, Philly, Charlottesville, and maybe a couple other places in there that I'm forgetting. In Philly, we're playing at World Cafe Live.
Oh, cool.
Which,
yeah, that's huge if you're an NPR listener. That's awesome. That's huge.
He's a big NPR listener, and he was like, have you ever heard any of these recordings?
Exactly.
You are going to be playing at
huge.
this place.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow. It just learning about these different places. So it's mostly going to be like a Northeast tour. And then after a 2-week break, we're going in late March to mid-April, we're going down further south. And we're all the way to Texas, I think playing in Austin and Dallas. And then we're also playing in New Orleans at a barbecue festival.
Oh, wow.
I know, I'm very excited.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Cole just got a van, and
I saw that, yeah.
nice and spacious enough that, I don't have to be worried about being too cramped up with all my, I love them, but don't want to be too cramped. And yeah, I'm so excited. It's going to be so different from waking up every day and going in a classroom and like fielding all this different craziness from students. And I think about that sometimes, like how different it is, but it gives me a lot of good stories to tell. And it's awesome. Yeah.
That's so exciting. Oh, I'm so excited for you.
Thanks.
That'll be a really great adventure.
I used to not like appreciate old time music. It was almost like I had the privilege enough to reject fiddle. My grandma brought me out into the middle of nowhere, which just so happened to be like a Ralph Stanley festival where he was still alive and playing on the stage. And I, met him and took a photo with him. And the whole time, me and my middle school angst and my sister were like, where are we? We cannot get service on our phones.
Right.
And just all these random experiences that were so like world building and musically influential and stuff. And like at Cowan Creek, even when I was little, I refused to jam for the many years of the beginning of that festival. Also might have had to do with me being 7, but like between the ages of like 7 and 12, I completely rejected jamming outside of the class setting and made fairy houses with Elizabeth and Grace Rogers until eventually it became cool. And I realized that that it was really fun to play music with other people. So yes, once that breakthrough happened, it was only a matter of time until I started trying to suck everyone into my musical agenda of having fun and playing music as a social activity. So yeah. Then there's like sort of an area in between some of these players who are like in their like late 30s who have been around a little bit longer. And like, I don't really know him very well, but for Cole, Nick Jamerson has been a huge hand. Like, and also that is not to say that like when I was little, I looked at like Don was and still is, but like Don was a rock star, a fiddle player, and all these older people who are like masters at their craft were like rock stars. And I think growing up with Sunday Best as an influence for Cole, that like Nick Jamerson was literally a rock star.
It's really nice to see Kentucky musicians such as Nicholas Jamerson, who've been making music for decades, to now be supporting new musicians coming up, young musicians coming up, and supporting other musicians, creating music festivals within the state. That's encouraging to see.
Like for, specifically talking about Cole and not as much my experience with old time music, but people who helped Cole and then helped me and Cole as we were playing together, that would have to be Arthur Hancock and Chris Schaus. I was talking about their bluegrass band, but like Arthur is someone who had a huge hand in Cole's album and like just getting that out into the world, and some of the songwriting on it too, on like the song "Humble Enough to Hear." And then he has also been very welcoming to me into the project, and I have played a bunch of shows with Chris Schaus, who, I mean, both of these people I had seen play a couple times before, and I was like, again, these are bluegrass rock stars. And it was terrifying at first, but to have them recognize that community and try to like build that rather than like exclude, it's just been so cool. Yeah, I just love that musicians in Kentucky are nice to other musicians, because you don't get that everywhere you go. Like there's some space and some, you know, coldness that you'll experience randomly, and although that doesn't happen a ton, like maybe in Nashville on a one-off random gig, or just, you know, you're in the middle of nowhere and someone won't share their green room with you, it makes you realize how lucky we are in Kentucky. Lucky that we have like almost like sister bands, like the local Honeys, for example. Like they feel like my musical sisters, but not even like that level of friendship. They would act like that towards any other band. And they just, and any of these other Kentucky musicians that I would name, would act that generous and be that welcoming to any other band without question. You know, there's a sense of like almost like Southern hospitality that we have, but also just like a, you know, in Don's words, you know, in a situation where that was not happening, Don said, "It's just not right for the community." In his accent that I cannot mimic, he said, "It is just not right for the community." And, you know, you got to act right for the community.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I love that.
I
love that. That is cool. That is what's going to, well, I would love to hear after you tour and even after the fall, just to hear, you know, your experiences of, I mean, that, like you said, it's going to solidify who you are individually and then as a band. And it'll be neat to hear about, I don't know. Like you should be very proud. All of you all should be very proud of what you all do.
So many stories, I'm sure, will come out of it.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's been so nice to like, you know, verbalize all of the music stuff on this podcast and kind of, you know, gain a new random appreciation on a random day of the week. Like that I worked a non-musical job, and just kind of sit back and think like, I am so lucky for all, like from, you know, my early childhood with my grandparents and the stuff that I currently do now. Like I am so lucky to have that.
Thank you so much for listening to the 8th episode of the Midnight Ramble. You can find Ella Webster on social media. And for updates for this podcast, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Instagram. Go out and support your local musician and venue, and happy listening.